Okay guys, welcome back. This lecture is probably going to be a bit longer than the other ones usually are, as we would be going over this over the course of a couple days. But it's going to be start of our next unit. Realism, Impressionism, Pre-Raphaelites. We'll also go over Post-Impressionism and Art Nouveau and stuff, but those will be on the next set of slides. But okay, a good theme for these would be art of the everyday. We're not going to be doing a lot of exotic stuff. We're not going to be really focusing on nature quite as much, and the sublime and stuff like the romantics were doing. But Paris has changed a bit. Good question is, what's new in Paris in the second half of the 20th century? We have a new king, Napoleon III, so he's the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. He's actually the first elected president of France and the last monarch to reign. He's the one that commissioned the Grand Reconstruction of Paris, and we're going to get a lot of new stuff. Pretty much Paris, as it is known today, comes during his reign. Stuff like this, the opera. So, quite magnificent. Perhaps you've seen it in movies like the Phantom of the Opera and whatnot. But something that's also going to be super important and super influential is Japonisme and Japanese prince. So in 1854, Commodore Perry, who's a U.S. naval officer, he kind of led this expedition that forced Japan to end its policy of isolation. So this starts to open up trade between Japan and the U.S. and Europe. Japanese prints were shown in the Paris Universal Exposition of 1867, and these prints become pretty influential actually in the art in the U.S. and Europe. We do know that woodblock printing had begun in China about the 4th century, and the 6th century Buddhist missionaries brought the technique to Japan. And they were usually first used for printing words, but in the 16th century, artists began to use them to illustrate text, and so we get, and in the 17th century, they started using color. So we're going to look at a few of those. Kitagawa Utamaro. This is the most influential prints came from the Edo period, which ran from like 1600 to 1868. Edo is actually the name for Tokyo, which is the residence of the emperor. And so we get the ukiyo-e school of painting, which means floating world. I think I have it on here on another slide, but I'll just tell you it's Ukiyo-e, ukiyo-e. Kind of just refers to the transience of material existence. Popular subjects generally were stuff like theater, dance, courtesans, like this, everyday task, leisure. We do get landscapes and cityscapes, though, and lots of beautiful women. Idea. So here's that. But we get lots of linear details on the face. We get almost no shading. 3D forms, though, are kind of created by just contours overlapping and foreshortening. So this is probably the most famous one, Hokusai. The Great Wave generally is what it's called. But yeah, so it's one of the most famous works of art in the world, definitely. I'm assuming most of you have seen it. But Impressionist artists were astounded by it. Debussy himself, the composer, said that this image inspired his famous composition La Mer. And so this is from a series of 36 views of Mount Fuji. You can see Mount Fuji in the back. It just looks like, almost looks just like another wave, essentially. This actually does show influence from that stuff that they're taking from Europeans as well. It's not just it's a give and take. We're not just giving from Japan. So we get Dutch influence. There were Dutch art prints that came to Japan via Western trade. So he's kind of using his own form of linear perspective. This low horizon line, distinctive European colors, is actually Prussian blue. But all of the images in the series feature a glimpse of the mountain. So kind of full of visual play, though. The mountain is made tiny by the use of this perspective. Appears, too, as if it will be swallowed up by the wave. Can almost be lighthearted. His optical play also is often that way. And the spray from the top of the crashing waves almost just looks like snow falling on the mountain, Mount Fuji itself. Sorry, I have a cat that's harassing me. Okay, my bad. But Mount Fuji is definitely framed here, even though quite low. So, and the waves kind of create this diagonal line leading our eyes to its peak. And Mount Fuji, as if you don't know, is the highest mountain in Japan, has long been considered sacred. So, and we're definitely interested in some weird like oblique angles, contrast of near and far, contrast of like the man-made and the natural bird's eye views as well. So, ukiyo-e actually originated as a Buddhist term, referring to that impermanence of the world. And we do get a lot of emphasis on line and pure bright color, kind of as well as their ability to distill form down to a minimum. But kind of moved away from tradition of making images of courtesans and actors, which was the customary subject of ukiyo-e prints. Instead, Hokusai's work kind of focuses on the daily life of Japanese people from a variety of social levels. And this would have been seen in Paris in 1867, the Japanese Pavilion International Exposition. Hiroshige, the big one as well, Otsu. So travel is also a popular subject. His last series was entitled 100 Views of Edo. We get lots of travelers and merchants. This is supposed to be like a busy street seen from an elevated vantage point. This kind of stuff appealed to Impressionist artists as well, which we will see. But we do get linear perspective, which we are taking from Western art. You can see it here perhaps pretty well. So there definitely was that influence both ways. But nice bridge. Just give you an idea of what we like to do. We're going to see this stuff perhaps most famously in post-impressionism. But we get lots of flat shapes, sharp contours, this compressed space, these cropping and angles with things, you know, cutting the view off essentially, stuff like that. But here are some good things to know about the ukiyo-e Japanese prints. There's lots of flat shapes, sharp contours, compressed space, cropping, angles, asymmetry. Something else that was also pretty important for the time is color theory. This is new for the time, is complementary colors intensify each other when placed next to each other. So yeah, I mean, Impression Sunrise, which we'll look at, is essentially just blues and oranges. That's all it is. So you also will get this idea of optical blending. Okay, we're going to look at realism. So it's good to know the difference between naturalism and realism. So naturalism is, they're depicted naturalistically, right? They've depicted how things are actually. They're not distorted and whatnot. That's how people actually look. So this is naturalistic, but it's not realistic because it's not depicting you. It's not reality. Not depicting reality. This is a fake story. This is propaganda. So realism is going to try to show you things undistorted, unromanticized, mostly a working class. So realism is real life. Charles Baudelaire, who's quite the character, argued that the art should reflect the here and now. So we get this emphasis on the ordinary, everyday, modern experience, not idealized nor dramatized. I mean, in some regards, it actually quite is, but it is idealized because we're championing laborers and the common people. Just the fact that we're painting them, it kind of idealizes it in its own right. But that's the idea, at least. So, good question is realism more about style or about content? I tell you, pretty much it's content. Okay. Here is Courbet, the Stonebreakers. So the subject is just two workers. He actually met them outside of town, pounding stones to make gravel. Neoclassicists probably would not have portrayed this scene. Romanticists might have, might as also would not have. But we don't really get references to past art. Very inelegant, unidealized. We get the ragged clothes, dirty. He's just painting what he sees. There is generally a commentary. This is actually painted 1 year after Karl Marx and Frederick Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto. We do get the young and the old. Kind of this idea, you will stay in the class you're born into all your life. We do get the same attention to the rocks and whatnot as we do to the faces. So, just not really discriminatory in that regard. But kind of the idea that common people are noble and important, kind of just worthy of history painting. It was actually first exhibited in the Paris Salon in 1850. It was actually destroyed during World War II, along with 154 other pictures. When a transport vehicle uh, by Germans near Dresden was actually bombed by Allied forces. So, but we got color photography of it. Color photography was invented in 1907, actually, and it became pretty popular by 1935. So we have pictures of it, but the work has been destroyed. So, but we've seen pictures of everyday stuff before. You remember during the Borg brothers, Peter Bruegel, of course, the elder. And here's Courbet again, burial at Ornans. So, it doesn't really look radical, but the idea itself is kind of radical for the time. This was accepted into the Salon, but it was heavily criticized because of common people, common clothing, just common sitting. You get a dog. It's definitely a funeral, but we don't even know whose funeral it is. Just reporting the scene, essentially. So it's just history painting, but about real life. He actually is quoted with saying, "Show me an angel and I will paint one." Just going to paint what we see. So, and monumental paintings used to be religious, or mythological. And then we get some more historical stuff later, right, with the Romanticism. But Courbet thought the average everyday people were worthy of monumental painting, essentially. So it's not even really a story, though, either, like the Raft of Medusa was. But here it is. It's quite large. Show me an angel and I will paint one. Stop Courbet. Okay, we get a female artist as well in Realism, Rosa Bonheur. This is also showed in the 1850 Salon. She studied under her father, who was a drawing instructor and a socialist who advocated for full equality of women. She was pretty determined to be a successful artist. She generally worked on a very large scale as well. She definitely has this technical finesse, the scientific details of farm animals, specific species, definitely not exotic animals like Romanticism, and we don't really put in a moral of neoclassicism, but kind of just this end of hierarchy of subject matter. Looks very almost photographic. It's very detailed, very close brushwork. And here's a detail. We can see that. She also began dressing like a man. She actually had to receive a permit from the Paris police, to do so. And she said this was necessary pretty much because she would go paint in rough all-male atmospheres of like Paris slaughterhouses and stuff. So she didn't, to make it, not stand out and stuff. She would just dress like a man. Okay. We're gonna look at Thomas Eakins. This is a painting by Susan McDowell Eakins, who's his wife. Actually, was one of his students. He married her. But there's the man himself. Here is Max Schmidt in a single skull. So Eakins himself is from Philly. He's from Philadelphia. This is post-Civil War America. He was able to go study in Paris in the late 1860s and return to the U.S. Like the Impressionists and stuff, he painted middle-class leisure activities, lots of popular sports, like rowing, and surgery clinics. So the sculling pictures, these are kind of like heroes of modern life. It's a big sport back then. He would carefully reproduce outdoor scenes, not really quickly record them like Impressionists did, but we get several sketches of skulls and oars to get the perspective right. He studied the light effects and anatomy and these minute details, so kind of akin to realism in that regard. He was also an avid rower himself and depicted himself in the skull, excuse me, in the background. So he actually did have a lot of students, even women, that would work from nude models rather than plaster cast. So. The detail. This one's in the Met in New York City. And here's another quintessential American painter for the era, Winslow Homer. He was actually a magazine illustrator and then a pictorial reporter actually during the Civil War. He visited Paris in the 1860s as well, saw the works of Courbet, Manet. It's supposed to give you this idea of the fleeting moment. It's a kid's game. Um, they're all going to be in this for an absolutely split second, but very much frozen in time. He gets into lots of strong modeling, almost makes them more monumental, heavily outlined, but gives you these emblems of simplicity and wholesomeness. The kids wear very simple clothes. We have a very simple school in the background, just bare feet. Snap the Whip's kind of a symbolic for the aim of unity, nation struggling from the effects of the Civil War. But we got this youthfulness, this hope. Children kind of became the embodiment of innocence and promise for a better future. So we also have the nostalgia for an agrarian past here in this more rural setting as population was shifting towards cities. Here's another Nadar image of Edouard Manet. Manet is a very important figure, but he's very well dressed. He's known to have perfect manners. He was kept up with current events. He would hang out at cafes to keep abreast of new ideas, but he was very well known for breaking artistic conventions. And you remember this image from the workshop of Raphael, essentially after Raphael. These three characters right here, we have copied them. Manet has copied them. So, this was actually not accepted at the Salon in 1863. Louis Napoleon set up a salon for the rejected pieces in a separate building, and Manet agreed to show it there, even though people just usually came to reject the, to mock the rejects, sorry. It was considered pretty scandalous. So we got a contemporary scene. We have well-dressed men with a nude woman. There's no allegory, though, or history or mythology to it. He did acknowledge that it was inspired by Titian and Raphael, but the style itself, it was supposed to look unfinished. They have these flat shapes, kind of like the Japanese prints, but the unconvincing space. Look at the perspective in the back. This woman is huge. If she came up to them, woman kind of hovers above them. So we're kind of looking at a painting rather than through or onto a window onto nature, which is the Renaissance ideal, right? Has been for some time. So you can see why it might have been scandalous. First to kind of reject that. And Manet is a very important figure because of stuff like this. And here are the elephants. Here are the cats. Okay. This is by Edouard Manet, not to be confused with Claude Monet. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But the painting shocked the public at the Salon des Refuses, Paris, and the artist directly influenced which of the following movements? See Impressionism. So he's sometimes included with the Impressionist, seen as the first Impressionist, but he's often also not really considered an Impressionist, but he's definitely very influential for the Impressionists. Here's the rag picker. This one's in Pasadena, California, so a little bit closer. But another Monet, a bar at the Folie Bergère. So some artists kind of straddle styles. Pissarro, who's an Impressionist, will become a post-Impressionist, essentially. Monet actually never took part in any of the Impressionist shows because they would have their separate shows, right? But he did adopt the brighter colors of the Impressionists. He kind of remained relatively enigmatic. There are a lot of different interpretations about him. But this one here is a second floor bar. It's overlooking the main floor below. Kind of complicated. We get these different illusions. The upper left, we have a woman on a trapeze. But we do have a mirror that reflects the scene in front of a barmaid. But the barmaid is real. She's not a reflection. She looks pretty empty, though. Her reflection is distorted. Suggestion, perhaps, that a man is making a proposition to her. Would explain the distortion, the two identities. Everyone's having a good time, but the main person, except for her. So there's this illusion of gaiety. She's kind of alienated. Modern life is not so perfect. Money can't buy happiness, stuff like that. This was a very expensive restaurant, so it catered to the wealthy. No one really cares about this girl in the bar. They see her costume, which reveals what she does. They see the drinks, which reveal how she can serve them tonight. And they see the flower on her bodice, which reveals her expertise. but she is completely objectified by her blind society. And yeah, she may have chosen the profession, but she may have put on the dress, she may have come to work that night, but her eyes reveal that it's all wrong. There's that. Angela, Cat, okay. Degas. Edgar Degas. So, the dance class. It's like the back room of a dance studio, pretty much. We get a very unglamorous poses. We get cropped figures, which we didn't generally do before. Suggest kind of this candid viewpoint. We get a tipped up floor. This doesn't look like it should be that way. And the asymmetry of Japanese prints. It's kind of this potential instability. But very soft, loose skirts, contrast with like the dark hair that we see. And we have red that kind of figures throughout here, like uniting the foreground all the way to the background and stuff. So, but yeah, very unglorified. She's like getting her friend just helping her with her dress, her tutu, or whatever. People just relaxing, doing whatever. Do you know Degas like to paint horses? Okay. But French Impressionism officially started. It's about 1870 to 1890, so only roughly 20 years or so. Biggest name is probably this guy, Claude Monet. Another photograph by Nadar. And this is a painting by Renoir, but looking at Monet painting in his garden. Kind of just a clue to what Monet is all about. He worked outdoors, not just to make sketches, but to do his finished painting, so in plein air painting kind of began here. Most influenced by Corot, we looked at the end of Romanticism, kind of just work outdoors, as well as a local landscape painter named Boudin. So kind of just, one of the innovations of this period is painting in tubes. Like paint was more transportable at this point. But here's an early painting of Monet. So before it was like a more impressionistic style. He did this when he was 17. So definitely had the talent. But here's on the bank of the Seine, Benecourt. So very bold brushwork, what he's known for. Again, he's trying to utilize that color theory of optical mixing. So like the brushstrokes of color blend optically. But the colors are brighter, a bit more sunny, kind of like Corot. The shadows are not black again. Sorry. And then here's a quote that he sent to a friend. When you go out to paint, try to forget what objects you have before you, a tree, a house, a field, or whatever. Merely think, here's a little square of blue, here is an oblong of pink, here a streak of yellow, and paint it just as it looks to you, the exact color and shape, until it gives you your own naive impression of the scene before you. Here, like the realist, the Impressionists believed that they were conveying truth in painting, but instead of emphasizing social and political truth, the Impressionists aimed to achieve optical reality, that is, a visual truth, what the eye actually sees. So, I feel like it's a bit easier to get behind than realism in many regards. But, yeah, there's that, essentially. One thing about Impressionism, though, is the subject matter is usually a little on the boring side. But, oh, there's the quote. Yeah, I just read. Forgot I was there. Okay. This is perhaps one of his most, probably his most famous painting. So the name for the group Impressionism actually comes from this work. It was kind of used by a critic as like derogatory at the first Impressionist exhibition. It was taken from the title. So he said they were essentially just impressions. They were not finished paintings. They looked sketchy, unfinished. But again, we're sharing that characteristics with realism. But we do get lots of contemporary subjects, but they look a bit, flat, unfinished look. More of a record of the moment, though, still. Bit different. more about the nouveau riche and the middle class, like these leisure activities, the new rich, nouveau riche. So, and we also will focus a bit more on landscapes and cityscapes rather than figures. And we're generally all working outdoors completely to record the light in the atmosphere. And rather than painting objects, they painted the colored light that reflected off of objects. That's the idea, right? So they're painting what they saw, not what they knew, trying not to be scientific about it. Monet said himself that it really couldn't pass for a view of Le Havre. Just couldn't really pass for it, but this is still what he's painting. Here's what a student did. Made an edible cookie. Awesome. Yeah, just everyone hated their stuff. Easy, just don't have a next show. Times have changed. People generally love Impressionist aesthetic, stuff like that. Okay. La Gare Saint-Lazare, Arrival of a Train. So Monet did also like to show modern city life. Made about 10 paintings of this same train shed to record busy people and like the grand new apartments behind. But we can still kind of feel the steam and the dampness, just that atmosphere. Here's another one, a little bit darker, same place. Yeah, skip that. Yeah, one cathedral, wood, as some people call it. But lots of times painting the same stuff, just different times of day, just to get different effects of light, because it's different. Different times of day for the different lighting. So here's the same place, 3 different times. So they're 3 different colors, all in a set. Here, give you an idea what he liked to paint. Poplars. Later in his life, he was known for the water lilies. These are in the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. It was kind of a big deal back in the day, like the 1950s or so, when they included Impressionism in the Museum of Modern Art, because it's the Museum of Modern Art. But quite large, so you can see here he is working on them. He's older. And here are some cookies. Delicious. Sorry, we're gonna have to go to this one. I split it up a couple semesters ago. But okay. Well, that's Monet. Now we got Renoir. This is Renoir himself. Quite busy. Stands at Le Moulin de la Galette. So he's a friend of Monet. They actually often painted side by side. Just like I showed you that painting of Monet that was by Renoir. He also liked to show modern life, but he especially loved painting people in social settings. So a bit different than Monet. Monet didn't generally paint that many people, but Renoir usually does. Usually showing the social life of the young leisure class. We get the emphasis on the people rather than the landscape. But we do get a lot of flickering, transitory light. You can definitely see here throughout the painting, through the trees and whatnot. And there it is. These aren't like massive history paintings. They're usually a bit smaller, but they're decent enough sized. Here is the luncheon of the boating party. So this is actually a popular restaurant for boaters. We can identify the class by their hats. These hats are called boaters. But the models for Renoir were actually his friends. The girl here with a dog on the left, he actually ended up marrying. We get the dappled sunlight, the momentary sense, of course. But a lot like the Japanese prince and photography at the time too, as well. Lots of cropping. People are cropped. What's a bit different too, the girl drinking. So. Yeah, let's get that one. Okay, this guy's he's a big name, Camille Pissarro. He was like 10 years older than all the others. He was kind of like a father figure to the Impressionists as well as to the Post-Impressionists. But he's also influenced by Corot and then Courbet. And he lived in the country instead of the city. So he usually, you can see that in his works, he preferred painting peasants and farms as opposed to city dwellers and social life. So that his paintings almost feel a bit more innocent than the others. But he took part in all 8 Impressionist shows. He's actually the only one to participate in every single one of them. There were only 8. But he painted outdoors like Monet. He emphasized the abstract qualities, usually the complex, structured compositions. He did influence a lot of later artists like Cézanne, Picasso. Cézanne actually said Pissarro was a father figure to him, and a little like the Lord himself, is what he said. So, supposedly a really nice older man. There's the Impression sunrise. If we're gonna look at a female artist, she's not the only female we're gonna look at, but she is the only American. She's the only one that's not French, I should say, and she's American. Mary Cassatt. So she was American. She trained in Philly. She actually commenced her father litter study in France. She was actually accepted in salon exhibitions and became good friends with Degas, and through Degas joined the Impressionist group. He was good. We want you to join a group. Nobody likes us or our paintings. We don't have any money, but we have fun and get to paint anything we want. Count me in. She usually focused on people, especially mother and child. Usually painted a lot of women, which the other woman, Morisot, does as well. Lots of times at the opera, lots of times reading, visiting each other, taking tea, sewing, often with children. She actually never had children of her own. But there is a new attention to child rearing in France at the time, as well as to women's rights. So there's this agenda for better education for women. And here, what's new, actually, is bathing regularly was a new phenomenon. Up to this point, we didn't really bathe regularly, so aren't you grateful for that? We get this emotional and physical involvement, kind of reminiscent of Madonna and child paintings of the Renaissance, but showing the importance of women's role in society. We get a high viewpoint, though, which is pretty akin to Japanese prints. Also strong forms and contours, so there's that. It's a couple student stuff. Baby butt. In the Loge by Mary Cassatt. Give this dynamic. She's probably looking at someone. You go to the theater to look at people and to be seen. This guy's looking at her. But she doesn't notice that. But we noticed that. We took the photo or something. And here's Monet's painting of Berthe Morisot. She's the other female painter. She and her sister Edna actually studied painting. Women couldn't attend the French Academy still, so they actually sought out other artists to teach them. And she studied with Corot, actually, and both of them actually had works accepted into the Salon of 1864. But they became close friends with Monet, and she actually married Monet's brother. And so she was pretty much in the Impressionist group from the beginning. And she usually focused on the life of the French middle class, just like most of them did, right? Oh, didn't mean to do that. But this is actually Berthe's sister and baby. So she often painted women and children just like Cassatt. She usually used models that were most readily available. And they're not usually frivolous, they're more meditative and thoughtful. So this is quite a sweet painting, actually. Here's Summer's Day. So a lot of pastel colors is kind of what Impressionism is known for, right? But wealthy women activities, gathering flowers, taking tea, child rearing, reading, sewing, vacationing, that middle class, kind of akin to, well, lots of the middle class in the Western world, including the United States. But we get this flickering paint, these bold brush strokes, definitely the strong diagonal, kind of like Degas and those Japanese prints. But yeah, definitely, as with most Impressionism, we have the interest in capturing everyday subjects, on the spot outdoor scenes, fleeting moments like this impermanence, the atmosphere, the light, colored shadow, modern urban life generally, leisure activities, the middle class, the nouveau riche, and the times of day and year. Monet is most with that, but yeah. Summary, kind of stuff I just mentioned, but the look of the ukiyo-e Japanese prints. Yeah, actually, I just did mention everything. Except for that last one. There is some influence on photography. I didn't really mention it too much, but you could take the history of photography class to get that. Okay. So that's Impressionism. We're going to go to the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So you might think of pre-Raphaelite. Well, Leonardo da Vinci is more famous than Raphael these days, but for, again, the longest part, Raphael has always been the famous one. So it's kind of a secret society. Sounds like this bad voodoo juju stuff, but started by 3 students at the London Royal Academy. We get William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millais, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And they pretty much denounce, they go pre-Raphaelite because they are denouncing most of the paintings since Raphael. So they liked the art that they perceived that was simple, direct, and sincere. So they really liked people like Fra Angelico, if you remember, Jan van Eyck. Also the spirituality of like the late Gothic period. So one of the reform ills of the Industrial Revolution through spirituality and art. Looking at early Renaissance Gothic art, pure, genuine art, depict truth by close observation of nature and details. The works characterized by rich, pure color on a white ground also included symbolism, but looked to literature, subject matter, especially like Shakespeare, Bible, and Arthurian legends. So they're pretty interesting. I like their stuff. We're going to look a little bit. I'm so sorry. William Holman Hunt, The Awakening Conscious. So Hunt himself was actually very religious. He came from a poor working class family, very much interested in Victorian morals. This is actually inspired by a passage from a book called David Copperfield, if you've heard of it. It's by Charles Dickens. And it's about prostitution in the city. So many women would become prostitutes and stuff because it was perceived pretty much as their only hope of bettering their situation. But the woman becomes aware of the lyrics of the song that they are singing on the piano, and pretty much looks outside, we see here in the reflection, and she's going to return to her family. So we get lots of, or it's cluttered with objects of consumerism, also cluttered with a lot of details, like Jan van Eyck Arnolfini portrait, which is actually in the National Gallery in London at the time. So we like the symbolism of Van Eyck. We got the cat over here and the bird, like the man with her. But the clock, it's almost 12, so little time left for action. Window reflected in the mirror with this freedom, beauty, simplicity of nature. Yeah. So it gives you a good idea what they like. And they're really good at the details. Look at this. That's lovely. So now they're all cats. Except for this is a rat. But, okay. Jean Everett Millais, Christ in the Carpenter's Shop. So this is a really good one to know. Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's best known for their biblical scenes and scenes from literature. So this is Christ as a child. He's received a wound in his hand, and he's being comforted by Joseph over here on the right, the balding dude, and Mary. So we get a lot of disguised symbols of his future role as Jesus, as like the Savior. So we get the cut in his hand, showing his palm. So like the wounds from the nails. We get John the Baptist on the right. Actually, he's carrying a bowl of water, so like symbolizing baptism, his future role. We get flocks of sheep in the outside. They kind of blend it. It looks like just a wall of rock, but it's just either sheep. Christ's role as Good Shepherd. We get the nails, again, crucifixion, tools on the wall, the ladder to the crucifixion, the dove. We get a dove sitting on the ladder, the Holy Ghost. We get a triangle right here, represent the Holy Trinity. So, but it's also kind of a social statement. We're kind of supporting the quality workmanship and labor instead of poorly crafted, mass-produced products of the Industrial Revolution, which I can definitely get behind. But identifies Christ with the working class, essentially. So we get dirt under the fingernails, kind of like Courbet did with the Stonebreakers, but we get very much realistic detail. He actually would go to, he went to a carpenter's shop to study wood shavings and musculature of a carpenter. So this is what a carpenter looks like, I guess, musculature. Wise. My grandpa and great-grandpa were carpenters, so I never saw them when they were younger, though. But here's the painting. It's not that big. But here's some details. The shavings and stuff. Drip of blood on his foot. Clip his toenails. Some nails on the board. Well, there must be the nail he cut himself on. And there he is, Very handsome little boy. Christ. The dirt under the fingernails of Joseph. Okay. So this is something that's not mentioned in the title, but we're going to look at. It's actually really cool. The arts and crafts movement. So this is a reaction to the Industrial Revolution and kind of this, again, the mass production of items with poor quality. William Morris is a big name for this. He's an author as well. He's a pretty good, cool guy, definitely worth looking into more. He started a company that made items for homes with like handcrafted, beautifully made items. And nature was an important inspiration. But here is one of the Morris rooms, the green dining room. So this was actually for John Ruskin. He's a writer. He's actually a really good writer. I recommend looking at his stuff too. Wrote about art, and he actually championed the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, kind of urged for the creation of beautifully designed, handcrafted objects that workers could take pride in producing over mass-produced products. Morris started this company, and they manufactured a lot of stuff like beautifully crafted fabrics, wallpapers. So wallpaper's still a thing. These are wallpapers though that I think actually look okay, like this wallpaper. Tapestries, carpets, tiles, furniture, stained glass, and he designed most of the wallpapers and fabrics actually himself. So, but mostly inspired from nature, generally considered more spiritual stuff. But we get here lots of gold background above the, see it here, above the wainscoting. So representing the 12 different months of the year. A lot like late Gothic art, cycles of seasons and life. Like to emphasize truth and quality, so we're not disguising materials. We get no prefabricated materials, like no cheap materials essentially, so it's quite expensive, you know. But pretty much helped launch the arts and craft movement. It's actually soon spread to the U.S. And actually kind of helped erase the Renaissance influence perceptions that valued the so-called higher arts over the lower work of like traditional craftsmen. So kind of blurring that line a bit, you know, the crafts are just as worthwhile as, you know, we have this term like fine arts and stuff like that, which may be a bit nonsense, but who knows. But yeah, it's actually quite lovely. I would love to have a room that looks like this. But here are some of the wallpaper designs. I'm just going to show you a couple. Quite nice as far as wallpaper goes. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this writing topic. I already skipped one or two, but we'll go ahead and do this. So like the people during the Industrial Revolution in England, we live in a society that often produces poorly crafted, mass-produced products of prefabricated and cheap materials. We tend to settle for these products because they are inexpensive and readily available, which is fair enough. But do you believe, like the writer John Ruskin, in supporting the creation of beautifully designed, handcrafted objects? And how can a person with a limited income promote such a cause? So just take a few minutes to write about that. Email me your response. Here's what a couple students said. I guess you can look at those too if you want. So another movement that we're going to look at briefly as well. You're going to get a lot of different movements, as you can tell, pretty much starting from this period onward, a lot of movements that are going to coincide with each other. We're just going to treat most of them pretty briefly. But this is the aesthetic movement, or just art for art's sake. A lot of just making art because that's what we want to make. We're not really necessarily trying to focus on subject or whatnot. The formal qualities is what gets emphasized. So, but here we get a lot of flat colors, very unsentimental, even though this is often called Whistler's Mother, but it's technically called Arrangement in Black and Gray No. 1 by James Abbott McNeill Whistler. And here it is in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. Very big museum there. And here's what Whistler himself had to say. As music is the poetry of sound, so is painting the poetry of sight, and the subject matter has nothing to do with the harmony of sound or of color. So, subject matter doesn't matter, essentially. A couple takes on Whistler's mother. Whistler's brother, Ernie. Well, here's another one where you could probably get that idea more of what he's talking about, rather than the other one. But Nocturne in Black and Gold, The Falling Rocket. So as he emphasized color and form, he became increasingly abstract, as you can see. He started calling them nocturnes. There's actually a music term for night scenes of the Thames River, so we get fireworks over it. John Ruskin, as we just mentioned prior for the arts and crafts, actually accused Whistler of flinging a pot of paint in the public's face. That's what he said about this, and Whistler actually sued him for slander. And he said, by using the word nocturne, I wish to indicate an artistic interest alone, divesting the picture of any outside anecdotal interest which might have been otherwise attached to it. A nocturne is an arrangement of line, form, and color first. And when he was on the stand, actually one of the questions for about whether it was actually slander or not, he was actually asked how long it took him to finish one of his paintings. So just something to keep in mind necessarily, you know. Different ideas are coming up. Generally paintings take a while to complete, but one of the ideas is if you can complete it really fast, then, you know, Ruskin wasn't lying. But yeah. Okay. Another figure, John Singer Sargent. Madame X. This is a pretty famous painting. The model herself was an American. She was an expatriate who, you know, someone who's an American but just lives abroad, essentially. Married a French banker, and she became pretty notorious in Parisian high society for her beauty and her rumored infidelities. Not sure if that's accurate or not. But she wore lavender powder, kind of prided herself on her appearance. Singer painted her in an attempt to raise his reputation because she was very well known, so he did it without a commission. He actually ended up receiving more ridicule than praise. He kept it for 30 years because of how much flack he got for it, and then he sold it to the Met. And then when he sold it to the Met, he said, "I suppose it is the best thing I have done." So there's that. This was originally pretty scandalous. This was originally painted with one strap hanging down, a bit more sensuous illusions, but yeah, changed that. This is already a very, for the time, 1884, this is already a very revealing dress, so yeah, here's what a student did, here's what another student did. Okay. So looking at some other stuff like some architecture, it's going to be being built during this time. We got the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. I'm pretty sure this is looking at Brooklyn from so we're sitting on the Manhattan side. But this is a huge technological feat. The piers rise about 300 feet above the water, and they span the distance from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Support 5 lanes of traffic. This is a pretty big deal for the time. We don't have cars then, obviously. But we get the suspension cables with vertical cables and wire cables running from piers all the way along the bridge, so kind of creating these triangular units. Part of that was revival styles. We get the Gothic arch piers like Roman triumphal arches, kind of a America's arch of triumphal arch, but definitely on an awesome scale and achievement. It's very, very, you know, technological superiority. There's another one. This is in Paris. It's an innovative use of iron, essentially. So we get lots of the barrel vaults and the columns on the interior. They look pretty Romanesque, actually, but would have felt modern just because they're iron. Kind of suggestive of train sheds, which people would be very acquainted with at the time, and therefore voyages, right? Pretty symbolic. The books is the library, that kind of bridge to the future. Yeah. Didn't need to use the iron, of course, for the support. Just kind of a metaphorical purpose. Something else. The Eiffel Tower, Gustave Eiffel, very famous, of course. Is actually designed as an entrance to the 1889 Paris International Exposition, which we used to have. I don't know if they still have them, actually. They might, but they're not nearly as big deal as they were. But he actually had constructed many bridges, and he just used similar technology. So we get the cast iron. So 984 feet high. It was twice as high as any existing structure in the world at the time, but also came to just be viewed as a triumphal arch, symbol of Paris and France. We already have triumphal arches in Paris, but you know, this one's a lot taller, stands out a bit more. That looks very modern because it sheds the historical references, and we get these new materials, the iron, the cast iron. It's kind of dictating the style. Here's it today. There's Google looking at it. And there's some owls from William Morris. Okay, we didn't do it for Romanticism, but we're going to do it here. We're going to do the Impressionist unknowns quiz. So here's your bank. We're going to look at Manet, Degas, Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Morisot, and Cassatt. So best of luck. First one. Outside people that dappled light. This is a Renoir. This is the swing. Looks pretty akin to his style, I think. The guy who likes horses, I mentioned that in passing, like really quick. We didn't even look at the painting really. But it's Degas. This is At the Races. So if it's painting a woman in her home, it's probably one of the women. If it doesn't have a baby, it's more likely one than the other, although it's not necessarily the case. But it is Morisot, Berthe Morisot. The guy who lived more rurally, so usually was painting more rural peasant life. Pissarro, Camille Pissarro. It's quite nice, I like him. This is pretty famous, so I hope you guys know it. But this is Monet. And then the one with similar name. You could perhaps tell that this doesn't look super impressionist, so it's Monet. This is the Pfeiffer. And the last one, a lady leisure activity with a baby, Mary Cassatt. So, okay, but there's definitely there's a lot of works to know. I'll show you on the next slide, but there are definitely some ideas you want to know. We looked at a lot of styles: Realism, Impressionism, Pre-Raphaelite, Brotherhood, Arts and Crafts movement, aesthetic movement. The idea of realism versus naturalism, of course. You want to know the ukiyo-e prints. The color theories, like this optical blending, the complementary colors. Leisure time, the upper and upper middle classes. That's what we're going to get a lot of for most of these. But art for art's sake, which goes with the aesthetic movement. The Communist Manifestos coincides more with realism, those political, social commentaries on their art, support of workers' rights, essentially, the proletariat. And then independent art shows. We're going to get a lot more of those because we're not going to be accepted into the main salons and stuff. Here are the works you want to know. A few of those prints are good to know. A couple Courbets, Bonnaire, Monet, Degas, 3 Monets, 2 Renoirs, Pissarro, the 2 Morisots we looked at, 2 Cassatts we looked at, The Awakening Conscious by Hunt, Know the Room by Morris, Malay, Christ Carbon Shop, you definitely want to know that one, Whistler's Nocturne, Senior Sergeants, Madame X, and Thomas Eakins. I don't know why that one's at the end, actually, but Thomas Eakins, Max Schmidt in A Single Skull. So, okay. But of course, let me know if you have any questions. And this will be half of what's on the next exam. The next presentation will be the other half on post-impressionism and Art Nouveau and stuff. So, yeah.